Welcome to UPLEVEL, Real Health, Real Talk with Dr. Jenna Blasi. I'm Dr. Jenna. I spent years crafting ways to help women thrive, and I want to help you do the same. On this podcast, we dive deep into health at every level, focusing on the mind, the body, and the spirit. This is where real conversations meet transformational wellness. We'll be talking about all the things that truly matter, from nutrition and fitness to lifestyle, mindset, and personal development. Plus, the real deal on managing stress and navigating menopause. So if you're ready to elevate your health journey with authentic, transformative insights, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to UPLEVEL. Today we're going to talk about cardiovascular health. This is a super important topic for everyone. Most of us know somebody that's affected by cardiovascular disease, or we may personally be affected by cardiovascular disease. Did you know that it is the leading cause of death in women? And yet it's still underrecognized, underdiagnosed, and undertreated. This is why I want to talk about this. When I applied for my menopause fellowship, I really wanted to do a fellowship in menopause and do a deep dive into all things perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. But I also knew that there were limited spots and there were a lot of other people applying. I got a spot, which I'm very excited about. But the reason I bring this up is because I also knew I wanted to do a fellowship. Just like when I did my residency, when I finished up naturopathic medical school, I applied to a variety of residencies because I knew that I had my preferences of what I thought were the best, but I just knew I wanted that experience. And so the reason I bring this up is because my second choice was cardiovascular. There was a cardiovascular fellowship. And if I didn't get accepted and into the menopause fellowship, I planned on applying to the cardiovascular one because it is such an important topic. And even though my focus is menopause and perimenopause, guess what? Leading cause of death in women. And so there's a real emphasis there in the perimenopausal and menopausal years, shifting where our heart disease rates begin to match those of men. So today we're going to talk about some unique risk factors for women and the role of lifestyle, the role of hormones, what labs you should order, and what you can start doing today to protect your heart. Now, this is for any age, but it's especially important, obviously, as we get older. And we're also going to talk about how to eat to protect your heart without fear-based diets and in a way that's more inclusive and sustainable. So the truth is that heart disease is a big deal in women. It kills 1 in 3 women. This is more than all cancers combined. Now, none of us want to be a statistic, and these are not great statistics, but we can control it. The reason I bring it up is we have control over so many of the factors that influence the impact of the choices we make on our heart. I think I didn't say that quite the way I wanted to, but I think you get my point. So many women have atypical symptoms. If we go back to why is it so underdiagnosed? Why is it so undertreated and underrecognized? Part of that is a lot of the research is on men. Another part is that women have atypical symptoms: fatigue, jaw pain, nausea, shortness of breath, not just chest pain. And there's clinical gaps, as I just noted. Women are often left out of early cardiovascular disease trials. Many risk calculators are based on male data. So I see so many women in my practice, they're focused, let's say, on belly fat and releasing weight because, of course, we want to feel good in our bodies. But as a clinician, I'm looking going, this is also a metabolic issue in terms of your risk factors for metabolic disease and cardiovascular risk. And that belly fat is directly linked with our cardiovascular risk. When we have hot flashes in menopause, that is a cardiovascular issue as well. So there's a unique aspect to the risk factors for women because our hormones do affect things. Our hormones shift in perimenopause and menopause. Our estrogen is declining. Well, in perimenopause, it's erratic, but it's heading towards its decline. And estrogen is protective for our heart, which is why our rates of cardiovascular disease start to equal and look more similar to that of men. Now, there's pregnancy-related risks earlier in life, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, for example, and these increase future heart disease risk. Another increased risk that studies have found is actually having a hysterectomy. Now, I would say in my practice, probably over 50% of the women, I haven't actually run the data on this, but it seems like over 50% of women have had hysterectomies. Now, if you've already had one, this is not about becoming fearful of it. But if you're in a place where you're deciding, I have a friend and colleague who they want to, she's, late 30s, I think. Maybe early 40s, but I think late 30s, and they want to just remove her uterus, and it's not bothering her. And she's like, I don't want to remove my uterus. And they're like, what's the big deal? Let's just get rid of it. And so there's this sort of nonchalance, I think, that we bring to removing organs in our current conventional system. And when you remove a woman's uterus, even if you leave her ovaries, you're increasing or decreasing the age, I should say, of menopause. So increasing early menopause. She's more likely to go into menopause earlier, even if she still has her ovaries. I think there's some belief that the blood flow to the ovaries has decreased, so they start underproducing more quickly. Also increases our risk for cardiovascular disease. Autoimmune conditions tend to disproportionately affect women, lupus, RA, and these are linked with inflammation and cardiovascular risk. And then there's mental emotional aspects, stress, trauma, anxiety, and depression are often triggered by menopause and perimenopause. So this is where a lot of women in the perimenopausal years will be told they're just depressed or they're just stressed or they're just anxious and offered antidepressants when actually it's the changes in their hormones that are triggering that. And if they have a history of anxiety or depression, it can worsen around this time of life. And these mental emotional health components, they tie into chronic inflammation, to cortisol, and to the heart. So that's kind of a broad overview of why this matters and all of the pieces, not all of the pieces, but many of the pieces that go into this. So this is a vast subject, and I'm going to try and touch on the key points. The lifestyle connection is the part we have control over. We don't have control over our family history. We don't have control over our genetics, but we have control over whether we turn those genes off or on, whether we increase our susceptibility based on certain lifestyle factors, or whether we decrease our susceptibility. So nutrition, movement, sleep, stress management, these all play a piece in protecting the heart. All of these topics that we have talked about over and over again that I love to talk about. So specifically for women, I've stressed it before and I'll stress it again. Strength training. This helps manage visceral fat. So visceral fat is particularly dangerous for your heart health. So strength training, ladies, if you're not doing it, it's time. It almost needs to be a non-negotiable at this point in life if you're menopausal or perimenopausal, because it's particularly dangerous for your heart health. Now, strength training also supports blood sugar regulation, it lowers inflammation, and it helps us maintain our muscle, which is important for longevity and body composition and so many other pieces. So it's not just cardio that we need. But we do need cardio. I mean, cardio is beneficial for our heart. We could probably get away, if you had to just choose one, you could probably get away with just doing strength training and not doing cardio. But cardio training is really good for body composition as well. It is really excellent for cardiovascular health. So the ideal is aim for maybe roughly 4 hours a week of moderate to vigorous aerobic and or resistance training, because both forms are going to decrease your body fat percentage, decrease weight, which is good for your heart health. So they're going to improve your metabolic health, especially in the perimenopausal, postmenopausal women who are listening. Calorie restriction. I'm not going to go into this, but when it's appropriate, can support heart health. But quality matters as much as quantity. And this whole idea of, calorie in, calorie out is all that matters is not true. And also, so many of you have been restricting for so much of your life. You may actually need more calories, that the restriction has slowed your metabolic rate and put an extra stress on your system. So this is real individual. And this is where working with an expert clinician can really guide you as to when is calorie restriction appropriate. and not the 500 plus calories a day that we've historically been told we need to lower our weight, but something more sustainable. And so depending on your goals, maybe we're looking at 25 to 30% calorie restriction. And again, if you have a history of anorexia, if you have a history of binge eating, if you have a history of under eating and dieting, that may not even be the approach for you. When we look at the approach for eating, regardless of whether we're calorie restricting or not, again, the research across the board for the Mediterranean style eating is robust. The Mediterranean diet has been shown to be superior to minimal intervention or low-fat diets, right, in reducing cardiovascular events. So a Mediterranean diet that that could include fish, if you eat fish, that has extra virgin olive oil and whole grains and fruits and nuts and seeds, etc. So it's been shown to be superior to minimal intervention, meaning not really doing much, or low-fat diets in reducing your risk of cardiovascular events. And unlike very low-fat diets, which hopefully none of you are really doing anymore, because these can even cause harm to our bodies, the Mediterranean diet focuses on balance. And I'm big on balance. If you've listened to my podcast, like balance across the board. So olive oil, fatty fish if you eat fish, greens, legumes, whole grains, nuts. Many people find it beneficial to keep sodium under 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams a day, especially if you have high blood pressure. This may be necessary for some women, again, especially with high blood pressure or hypertension. But we don't need to fear salt. I've worked with people who they don't use any salt at all. Our body needs some sodium, but not typically to the level that we get. And so finding that, again, balance for yourself. And this is where working with somebody who can look at your particular history, your preferences, etc. But the research across the board really emphasizes eating regular, balanced whole food meals, consistent with Mediterranean patterns, ideally mindful eating, right? We're not skipping meals. We're not over restricting. We're not constantly eating on the run or under stress. Okay. So that's just kind of a brief synopsis of dietary patterns. And let me say briefly, I know that many of you have probably tried keto or super low carb diets for your quote unquote heart health or for your weight loss. I don't really have time to go into all of those diets, but what I will say is that there are some benefits short term. Now, a lot of women don't get benefits. I've worked with a lot of women who've tried keto, and if they have a male partner, their male partner, loses a ton of weight and feels better, and the woman either does for a period of time and then hits a wall, or doesn't get the results, or ends up more fatigued, especially for women. But I would even venture to say, I think with the research, it's for everybody. This is, if you're going to utilize these more, I'm going to call them extreme, because I think when we micromanage our food to that level, it is a little bit extreme. They're meant for a short period of time. And the research shows that you may get benefits in a short period of time. Keto for some, you might release weight, you might feel better. Your labs could even potentially improve. I think there's some decent data on insulin coming down, etc. But the longer term studies don't show that benefit typically. It's not cardioprotective. It can lead to increased lipids, increased cardiovascular events, as well as a lot of the studies on the benefits have been done on obese and sedentary people. And so those benefits start to kind of wash out when you're in a different group than that group, as well as when we're looking at long term. So again, I'm not going to take too much time to go into that. And for most people, it's also not sustainable, and we're not maybe going to get the fiber that we need or the nutrients that we need. And that's also the issue with the high saturated fat diets, which keto often is, carnivore often is our lipid profile is usually worsening, which has a direct link to our risk for cardiovascular events. Let's move on to sleep and stress. Poor sleep. I think that was two episodes ago, I went into the detriments of poor sleep. It leads to higher blood pressure, cortisol imbalances. It impacts our insulin, our blood sugar. It leads to more cravings. And all of these things contribute to increased strain on our heart. Chronic stress in general equals chronic inflammation. If your cortisol is chronically high, then that's chronic inflammation, and this is increasing your cardiovascular risk. Now, side note, they have not found in research that coffee leads to increased cortisol chronically. Is that a word? Chronically? I feel like chronically. Anyway, whether it's a word or not, I hope you understand what I'm saying. So I probably should do a whole episode on caffeine because there's so many myths around caffeine and coffee. And I know many of you are coffee lovers out there. And if you're not, great. But it's not necessarily like you need to stop drinking coffee. It's more the stress management, honestly, and the sleep and not having coffee too late in the day that's adversely affecting your sleep. So emotional stress is really the main thing. Emotional stress, that chronic stress from your emotions, from being overworked. This is a major cardiovascular risk factor for women. Let's not normalize burnout. Let's not normalize burnout. I have been thinking about doing an episode on burnout. It affects healthcare providers, but I know it affects many of my listeners as well. So for all of us, let's make rest and nervous system regulation part of our prevention plan. Have those non-negotiables, whether it's your bedtime, whether it's your exercise, whether it's your walks in nature. Make rest and nervous system regulation part of your prevention plan. All right. It matters and it makes a huge difference. And the patients and clients that I work with whose anxiety starts to come down and they start managing their stress better. Look, the outside will always do its thing. It's within us. Oh my gosh, their lives transform. Their lives transform because there will always be the things, the grief, the trauma, the upsetting life events. But when we can handle them better, when we can handle them without going into fight or flight mode or staying in fight or flight mode, we start to have real freedom in our lives because there's a calmness and an ability to handle life and resilience to stress that is really, really important, I think, for happiness and health. Let's talk about lab tests. A lot of practitioners are just running a really basic lipid profile. It's not just about cholesterol. It's not just about your total cholesterol. Sometimes that's the only thing people report to me. Well, my total cholesterol is X. And I'm like, well, what is your LDL? Did they run your ApoB? And so I recommend talk to your practitioner about running a high sensitivity CRP, lipoprotein A, little a. This doesn't necessarily need to be run over and over, this one, but at least once. ApoB, your fasting insulin. Most patients, they might have their glucose run. Maybe their hemoglobin A1C, especially if their glucose is being watched. Hemoglobin A1C looks at your blood sugar over 12-week period, so giving it an average rather than just that snapshot of your fasting glucose. These are important tests, especially ApoB. It is an excellent, excellent marker, both of your risk of having a cardiovascular event, your risk of how much of the cholesterol, for example, is plaque producing, right? How much of the cholesterol in your blood is atherosclerotic? That ApoB number is going to give us a really big picture, a good picture of that. And then as you change your diet and you start moving and maybe you add in some supplements or whatever your interventions are, ApoB will be a great marker to watch to see the effect as well as your LDL. So advocate for full lipid panels. We run full lipid panels. I mean, we run really comprehensive tests on all of our program members because I want to see what everything looks like and how everything's working together. But it is not just total cholesterol. And if people are telling you your LDL doesn't matter, that's your low density lipoprotein, which people call the quote unquote bad cholesterol. It's a little bit of a misnomer, but it's the one that's more likely to cause clogging of the arteries. If they tell you that it doesn't matter, the research doesn't support that. There is a direct correlation in study after study after study with increasing LDL and your risk for a cardiovascular event. And so I know there's a lot of people out there saying the research is skewed, the research is not reliable. And here's the thing with that. It's important to be able to critically look at research and look at what was the methodology, what was the sample size, how did they do the study, et cetera, et cetera. This is something I've been developing over the last few years, and I rely on the people ahead of me to help me critically appraise because it's not super straightforward. So yeah, let's look at who funded it. And even if it's, say, industry funded, a lot of the supplement studies are industry funded as well, doesn't necessarily, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not a good study, but it's good to know, right? And it might taint the research, but we can still critically look at the studies. And so what I've noticed, and one of my colleagues spoke to recently, a lot of the people out there are saying, don't look at the research and this doesn't matter and all the research is biased, are also quoting research. So they're kind of cherry picking. If you look at a lot of people saying, oh, all the research is biased and industry funded or whatever, and then they're saying, oh, you should eat, saturated fat and eat lots of meat. Look at this study. Well, we can't cherry pick. And oh gosh, I could go. I just thought of a whole nother tangent that I want to go on, but I'll try to be brief. Replacement food is a really important component to look at. So if you see a study that says, for example, X is not a problem for, I'll give a real life example. I don't have the exact study, but it was one that I looked at a few years ago when the carnivore diet was first getting big and people were saying saturated fat doesn't matter, LDL doesn't matter. And not just that they didn't matter, but that, animal fat and saturated fat don't increase your risk for cardiovascular disease. So when we went and looked at the studies that, because I've worked with a group of clinicians who does this, when we went and looked at the studies that these influencers were speaking to, what they didn't know was what was being replaced. Now, anytime you change your diet, you're removing something and you're replacing it typically with something else. So if we look at what is the effect of eggs, for example, on your diet, if you eat more eggs, you're eating more eggs at the quote unquote expense of something else, or you're removing eggs and adding something else. And if you add cinnamon rolls instead of your eggs, your cardiovascular profile will probably look worse than with the eggs. But if you add oatmeal with fruit and maybe some protein added, it might look better. So what we're replacing something with always matters. I love this topic. I think I'm going to have one of my mentors on the show in a few episodes, and really I want to talk about just the approach of looking at research. And for me, it's always that intersection of research-based but intuition. As you know, I believe in being empowered and listening to ourselves, but also looking at the facts. And I try to avoid cognitive dissonance in myself as much as possible. So in this particular instance, a few years ago, when I was looking at the studies that showed that animal fat does not increase your risk for cardiovascular disease, guess what they replaced, right? Guess what people were eating in this study that they substituted red meat and animal fat for? It was trans fats. Well, we all are in agreement that trans fats are not healthy. They're not good. They will increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. So if you take 1,000 people who are eating a ton of fast food and trans fats, and you say, here, have a steak, their cardiovascular risk will not worsen, right? And it might even improve a little. Now, I think in that study, it didn't improve. It just didn't worsen. But I could be wrong about that. Regardless, the whole headline that came out of that was, red meat doesn't increase your risk for cardiovascular disease. Well, no, it doesn't in comparison to shit. I'm sorry, pardon my French. No, it doesn't in comparison to trans fats. Then that same study, which nobody wants to go further with, they took, or studies since then they take the people eating red meat and they substitute coconut oil, and it was an improved cardiovascular profile. So there's a lot of people saying the saturated fat of coconut oil doesn't matter. It's healthier. It's plant-based. That is true in comparison to red meat. So coconut oil, as I recall, again, I don't have the study in front of me. Coconut oil had a slight decrease in cardiovascular risk. Coconut oil is a pure saturated fat, had a slight decrease in cardiovascular risk compared to just animal fat. But then let's take that a step further. Then they looked at fish and plant-based monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fats. That was the lowest risk of cardiovascular events and cardiovascular disease. So saturated fat does matter, but what are you replacing it with? If you're eating lard and you want to try coconut oil, will that lower your risk slightly? Yes, it probably will. If you're eating lard and you substitute olive oil, you'll have a bigger risk deduction. Okay, so there's looking at what we're replacing, and there is I don't want to call it a hierarchy, but that's kind of what it is, a hierarchy of what's, better, best. And so this is where the research is pretty clear on LDL does matter. It's directly linked to your risk of cardiovascular disease. Saturated fat absolutely increases your LDL, increases that risk factor. Doesn't mean you can't have it in moderation, but this is where I worry about the long-term health of people eating a lot of saturated fat, and not just for cardiovascular, but also for colon health, because that link is pretty clear as well. Okay, I'm done with this topic. This is not just my opinion. This is the majority of research out there. There's great agreement among nutritionists. There's not as much confusion in the nutrition world as it seems and feels like there is. But again, I'm always open. I'm not going to cherry pick things that meet some kind of agenda, and I'm always open to learning new information. But what I would encourage you to do is ask better questions at your appointment with your practitioners, and do a full panel, get a bigger picture that includes high sensitivity, oh my gosh, I can't talk today, high sensitivity CRP, which is a cardiovascular inflammatory marker, and these other tests that I talked about. All right. I did go off on that tangent. So let me reel it back in and wrap it up here. Let's talk about hormone therapy. I will likely do an episode very soon on hormone therapy because there's so much misinformation. Estrogen is protective of the heart. Now, hormone therapy, referring to replacing estrogen, we don't call it hormone replacement therapy anymore. We call it HT hormone therapy, or MHT, menopausal hormone therapy. It's not technically recommended for primary prevention of heart disease, but we are quite aware of the idea of a quote unquote timing hypothesis. And this hypothesis suggests that estrogen therapy started near menopause, the earlier the better, may be cardioprotective. So women that start estrogen therapy, and if you have a uterus, it has to include progesterone therapy as well to protect you from uterine cancer. If you start hormone therapy, the window of what we call the window of opportunity is within 10 years of menopause and under 60 years of age. So if you start hormone therapy after age 60 or after 10 years after menopause, you may actually be increasing your risk. Now, this is debatable, and we're still figuring out what does this window mean exactly, and this decision is really nuanced. And so it should be individualized. I'll do an episode on it, but it still should be individualized with a healthcare provider who's an expert in menopause therapy, in hormone therapy. But what I tell my patients is, look, if you're under 60 and you're within 10 years of menopause, the benefits of hormone therapy may very likely outweigh the risks. Very few women actually have contraindications. A lot of women say, oh, I have a family history of breast cancer. That's not a contraindication. There's even some debate if a personal history is a contraindication. I'm not going to go into all that, but what I will say is, if you're within that window, if you're under 60 and within 10 years of menopause and you're having symptoms, then it's worth maybe working with somebody. And it doesn't mean that after 60 or 10 years after, you can't start. But again, that's something you would work. I like shared decision making. I'm really big on shared decision making with the right practitioners, or practitioner, I should say, to work with you, to give you the information and decide what's right for you. The other thing I'll say quickly about this, since this is not my episode on HT, but it's really important. there's not a guideline that says at age 60, you should come off your hormone therapy. At age 65, you should come off it. At age 70, if your doctor is taking you off if you've benefited from your hormone therapy and you went on it in that window of opportunity and you've benefited greatly and your doctor only wants to take you off it because of your age or how long you've been on it, they may not be well informed on this issue and you might want to get a second opinion. I'll just leave it at that. That is not a reason. Oh, you're this years old, this many years old, and you've been on it for this long, so we're going to take you off it. Now, if you want to come off it, I work with women that want to come off it, and they come off it and they're fine, and other women, they try to come off it and they're not fine. So let's not just do these arbitrary shots in the dark. It's a disservice to women, and there's no evidence behind just taking you off it because of your age or how long you've been on it. But there is some evidence on this window of opportunity, still individual within those guidelines. Okay. And then I think we know some of the other risk factors: smoking, managing our weight, managing our blood pressure, our blood sugar. These are core strategies. All right. Stop smoking, release weight if you need to. I like to say release weight, not lose weight, but lose weight, stop smoking. Let's get the blood sugar and the blood pressure under control and manage the lipids. They do matter. These are core strategies. Get these regular risk assessments, especially around perimenopause. This is key because if we don't know, then we're probably not addressing it. So rather than using the information as something to be fearful about, use it as power. Use it as just what it is, information that now you can make better choices to keep yourself healthy, to improve your longevity. And advocate for tests beyond just total cholesterol, right? The high sensitivity CRP, your lipoprotein A, ApoB, fasting insulin, potentially a coronary artery calcium score or a CAC score. So that's kind of a recap of what you can do. And then let's finish with empowering your heart health today. What are the key takeaways? What are some 3 quick wins you could have in this area of your life? 1, adopt a Mediterranean style diet. Start small. Swap one processed meal for a whole food option. I was just listening to a colleague's podcast on plant-based nutrition. And oh gosh, I wish I had the stat, but I posted it to my stories on Instagram. So hopefully it's still there. But the research showed that even just swapping one meal a day with a plant-based meal had a decrease in cardiovascular risk and other health risk factors. I don't remember what the list was, but again, it's not like, oh, hey, you have to completely overhaul your diet. Start small. The evidence is strong that even small swaps make a big difference. The whole Meatless Mondays movement can lead to decreased cardiovascular risk, decreased colon cancer risk, etc. Number 2, prioritize sleep, movement, anti-inflammatory foods. So that goes back, anti-inflammatory foods goes back to number 1. And then sleep and movement. If you're not sleeping well, you're probably not going to want to move your body. If you move your body, you might sleep better if you don't do it too close to bedtime. So that could be an area of quick win. Maybe you move your bedtime up a half an hour or an hour earlier, whatever is reasonable for you. And then schedule that cardiovascular risk checkup if you haven't, a full one. Ask about those other labs we talked about. Don't ignore your symptoms. Don't wait till it's too late. So many people I see, they wait until there's a problem. Let's be sort of proactive now. Advocate for your care. Early, consistent action really matters. It matters more than perfection. This is not about perfection, but the earlier we can start to make these changes, the better. So heart health, an important a topic near and dear to my heart. I've sprinkled it in many of these episodes, and it was actually my wonderful associate doctor, Dr. Lexi's suggestion to do cardiovascular. She said, you seem to talk about it a lot. I said, I love it. I love that suggestion. Our heart is not just an organ. It's not just a muscle. It's a communicator. It speaks in rhythm. It speaks in energy. It speaks in emotion. So listen to it, honor it. Really on all the levels I've talked about, right? I've talked on kind of a scientific physiological, but then there's the intuition that I've done an episode on. So your heart matters. It matters more and more as you get older. It matters on all the levels, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. I believe that that's where spirit talks to us is through those that we say gut instinct, but it's also, listen to your heart, right? That's spirit communicating with us. So, I hope you loved this episode. I really enjoyed tackling this topic. Interestingly, I was a bit tongue-tied today. I don't know what that was about. But this is about your heart and it does matter. And so, share this with a friend or a loved one. It could, it could save a life maybe. And if you loved it, please, share on social media what you found useful, what you want to hear about in the future. Share this, with a friend, family member, leave us a review, leave us a rating, and please let me know what your biggest takeaways are. I look forward to hearing from you and I look forward to seeing you next time. Well, seeing you in quotations, being with you again next week. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful day. Thank you for joining me on this episode of UPLEVEL, Real Health, Real Talk. I hope today's conversation inspired you to take the next step in your health journey, one that nourishes not just your body, but your mind and spirit as well. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's episode, please leave a review. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep thriving. And remember, true wellness is a journey, and you are on the right path.